What's up guys? Today I'm going to show you how to take a single 8-foot 2x4 and turn it into 24 beautiful coasters. I found this piece of wood at the bottom of a bundle of 2x4s at Lowe's and I just love the color. It generally happens after a tree dies and the sap starts to flow back down to the bottom part of the tree. Not knowing exactly what I wanted to do with this 2x4, I bought it knowing it would come in handy, and 2 months later it did. I decided these coasters would be 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Since a 2x4 is 3.5 inches wide. Instead of trying to do the math and find out how many coasters I'd get out of 96 inches if each coaster is 3.5 inches wide and a table saw blade is 1/8 of an inch wide, I simply figured I'd cut the 2x4 into 6 equal 16-inch lengths, and each length will yield 4 coasters. I tried to split the 2x4 in half. Since each coaster was only half an inch thick, if I was able to cut it down the middle, I'd be able to get double the amount of coasters per piece of wood. So I set up my table saw fence to 3/4 of an inch, which would cut it in half in 2 passes. But this theory was quickly proven wrong. I've never had a kickback before, but I always stand to the side just in case. I could hear something not quite right with the saw. The force I was pushing with was starting to be overcome by the force pushing back. I moved my hands out of the way at the last second so my fingers wouldn't bend backwards, and somehow managed to use my awesome reflexes and hockey goalie skills to make a quick pad save. And I decided to screw this, so I put my table saw away and just planed each piece down to a ½ inch. So I planed down each piece of wood, making sure to take some material off both sides. Once that was complete, I brought the table saw back out. I set the fence to 3.5 inches wide, then cut the coasters to their final size. I was really pleased with the way they look, but I wanted to take the sharp edges off, so I took out my jaw horse. This is a Christmas gift I got a few years ago from my mother, and I found so many uses for it. It's basically a sawhorse with a 24-inch clamp on it. I used it to clamp my router upside down, creating a makeshift router table. I started with a 1/8 inch roundover bit, but felt that the roundover wasn't big enough and moved to a 1/4 inch. This gives the end a much larger roundover and a much smoother transition between top side and bottom. If I had to do this again, the only thing I would have done differently is use my full-size router, simply because I went through 2 batteries that night and still didn't finish all the coasters. The next morning I went out to finish the coasters off. This gives you a much better idea of what I was doing. Flipping the router upside down basically gives you a 9 square inch router table. After that, every coaster got a sanding using 220 grit and then 320 grit paper. Then it was time to put the first finishing coat of polyurethane on. I'm using some cardboard cylinders I made to prop up the coasters so I can coat both sides at the same time. There will be a small ring on the bottom once they're dry, but that should easily sand off. I started by coating the sides first, then I held it by the corners while I coated the top and bottom, and I let them dry while I went to work. Once I came home, I picked them all up and brought them in for another 320 grit sanding. And here you can see that ring left by the cardboard I was talking about. But no worries, a quick sand in the direction of the grain easily removes it. Every coaster was sanded on all sides. Then they went back out for their second coat of polyurethane. This time, I only coated each side and the top. Once I finished the top on the last coaster, the first one was dry enough, I could flip it and coat the other side without having to worry about it sticking to the cardboard. Once the second coat was dry, they all came in for their final finish. I have to point out, it's really nice to have a small project like this one so you can bring it inside, sit down and watch Community on Netflix while sanding. So the way I finished these coasters was very time consuming, but in my opinion, very worth it. First, you'll need a piece of cardboard or something to catch the mess, a bowl of water, wet sandpaper, car polish, car wax, some polish applicators, a microfiber cloth, paper towel, purple dye optional, of course your coasters, and something comfortable to sit on. I have 3 grits of sandpaper, 600, 1200, and 2000. I cut off a tiny 2 square inch piece from each sheet and soaked it in water for a few seconds, then went to town. You have to be careful here because you want the texture to be fairly smooth, but not sanding so much that you take the entire finish off. It took me a few tries to get this right, but that's okay, there's 24 coasters. Wet sand about 4 coasters at the same time, going through the grits, dipping the sandpaper when needed to make sure it's always wet. Once you have 4 or more coasters done, it's time to polish. I'm using a 2-part car polish by Mothers. I'm sure you'd be able to get away with basically any car polish, this was just on sale. The car wax I'm using is Turtle Wax. This will give it that extremely smooth feel at the end, as well as a bit of protection and waterproofing. So, put about a pea-sized dab onto a polish applicator and rub it in small circles. After 20 seconds or so, let it sit and start the second one. You want to wait for the polish to become hazy before wiping it off. This is why it's important to have 4 or more coasters ready for polish. That way you can work on one while the other 3 sit and haze up. Once the polish has been applied to the 4th one, you can then go back, wipe off the first one using a microfiber cloth, and then do the other side, and then proceed to do your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. If you have a 2-part polish like mine, repeat the step for the 2nd type of polish. When you're finally done polishing, do the exact same steps with the wax. Apply it, wait for the haze, then wipe off. Only this time, make sure you do the sides as well. I know this is a lot of work, but I believe it's the best way to finish a coaster. It's basically waterproof, so you never get that moment where you go to take a sip of your nice cold beverage only to have to remove the coaster that decided it wanted to hitch a ride and stick to the bottom of your glass as you raised it. These coasters were made for a friend of mine as a departing gift who was leaving our work. And he did the honor of testing them out that night. He ended up doing 2 tests. One is a nice full glass of a cold adult beverage, and one is just a glass of ice water as a control, and they both work perfectly. So yeah, the polishing was a bit overkill, but I want to show you the difference. This is how the coaster looks after the 2nd coat of polyurethane with no sanding. It's not bad, but you can see the brush marks, and it's not as shiny. And this is the coaster after wet sanded, polished, and waxed. It's smooth to the touch. Those brush marks are gone and it feels like glass, and it's got a really nice shine to it. This was just supposed to be a fun little video, but it turned into an awesome learning opportunity. I've gotten lots of positive feedback about these coasters, and I think it's a fun little project you guys should try. I think this is even worth trying to mass produce and sell on Etsy or other sites, so stay tuned for that in an upcoming video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a weekly video. Thanks for watching.